Hey YouTube, this is part 3, and possibly, depending on how far we get here, possibly the last in the Darktable NEWB series. Part 1 we talked about just understanding what you're looking at here. Part 2 I introduced some very simple modules, some of the basic modules. Today I'm going to do 3 things. I am going to introduce some more modules in the darkroom side of things. I'm going to talk a little bit about noise, and I'm going to talk about masks. And by the end of this, you will not be a noob. If you spend a couple of hours playing around with these concepts after this, you will not be a noob. And you will confidently be able to go and find more detailed videos and tutorials on the things that we're talking about. And also you should be able to dive into other modules and follow your nose and not be overwhelmed. So let's start with this one. If you remember, in part 2 we boosted this up to get the skin tones, to kind of get the skin tones to where we wanted. Then we used shadows to bring down this dark. But I'm going to do something different. I'm going to introduce you to the tone curve. Tone curves are a very, very common tool in photo editing. You'll find them in lots of tools. The tone curve in Darktable also has some additional things which are funky and very powerful. I'll talk about them briefly, but I'm really focusing on this, which is the lightness tone curve. So what you see behind here is you see our histogram. So everything over here is representing the parts of the photo that are bright, and everything over here are representing the parts of the photo that are dark. And in fact, we can use this little dropper to show that. So this spot is here, this spot is here, etc., etc. So our skin tones are kind of hovering around this upper level, and the background, starting from the brightest here, is like, this is our background and some of the darker parts of the hair and the outfit. You can turn that into a range of colors, so it's kind of cool too, but usually I just keep it on point. So what does this mean for us? Let's look at the presets that Darktable has given us. High contrast. If I fix the exposure in that, it will in fact just have taken that image and made a pretty high contrast, pretty cool looking image. If we go to low contrast, you'll see that it's made kind of a washed out look. Now look what it's doing. It's kind of pulling down the brighter things and pushing up the darker things, which makes sense, right? There's less contrast between bright and dark. As opposed to high contrast, it's pushing up the brighter things and lowering the darker things, so there is more contrast between the brightest and the darkest. And you'll see this curve, often this is called the S curve. Anything in a tone curve that isn't smooth in transition will create strange results, as I'll show you. I use the tone curve personally for adjustments. I use exposure to get things kind of where I want them ballpark, and then I use the tone curve for adjustments to that. Other people work in different ways, but let's say if I just turned that off by accident. So our skin tones are up here. So if I push this up, you'll see the brightening of things up in the brighter scale. Now look at the line. The entire line is changing, because if this line has jaggediness, everything goes very badly. So double click to reset, or I could have actually, here's another thing to know is if I want to get rid of that point, I just drag it all the way out. So when you're working with tone curves, you're really looking at subtle bends in this, and a very common thing that I would do is, well, let's just do it. So that's kind of where our skin is. So we're boosting the skin, and then our darkness is all the way from about there. So I'm going to pull that down, and I'm affecting the background there and darkening it the way I did last time by dropping shadows. And yes, it is impacting the other darks, but it is not affecting our brightness on the skin. So we could take that all the way down. We're going to start breaking things, but we could go for a super low key look, which is basically only the brightest parts of the images are showing through. We're heading towards that effect, but we've kind of broken it. There are more subtle ways to do this, but you get the idea. Anything we do down at the lower end of this, we're affecting the darks. Anything we do at the higher end, we're affecting the lights. Now to really briefly go into these, this is A and B color ranges. So you see there's magenta there and a blue here. So anything we're doing, well, I find this is messing with my head in terms of, let me just show you. Pulling this peak represents the present colors in our image. If we pull things down, we're pulling things into this greeny. If we push things up, we're pushing things into the magenta. On the B, if we pull down, we're going towards the blues. If we push up, we're going towards the yellows. Personally, as you can tell, I'm kind of stumbling around how to even explain this. This is not how I deal with colors personally. I use other modules that I'm going to talk about right now. But there you go. We have discussed slightly the tone curve. You can see now by bringing those down, we're doing weird stuff and breaking the image. Any really jagged lines in this is going to break your image, and any real extremes here is likely going to break your image. But it's a really powerful tool to dial in on very specific things. Let me see, should I do this with a mask on something else? No, let's talk about masks. Let's talk about masks separately. Let's talk about colors. I love this module. There are two dots here. There's a white dot and a dark dot. And a little bit like the tone curve, the white dot is affecting everything in the highlights range. So if we pull that all the way over to those reds, note how it's drastically affected the skin. But if you look over here into the darks, it's not really impacting that at all. That is impacted by the black spot. So this is a super powerful tool and very trendy too. Let's reset. It's very trendy to split tone, it's called. And there is a split toning module in Darktable, but this is just so straightforward, so visual. I'm more likely to use it. So the main goal here is to get an effect that is subtle and beautiful and doesn't look like an Instagram filter, unless that's what you're going for. But as you see, we can pull the skin tones down into the colder blues, and we can push the background up into the warmer tones, which is, I mean, there's unlimited things you can do. There are no right and wrongs, although some things clearly look better than others. The other color module I'm going to introduce is this one, which is awesome, and let's do that with this image. I'm going to crop that because this bugs me. I mean, not crop, rotate. There we go. So this is a, let's see. So let's start with saturation because that's most obvious. So we have a bluish light blue dress here, and again this little dropper, which you can see in many tools, is showing that that is around this color. So if we push the saturation here, what we're doing is changing the saturation in this range of colors. I can make that fairly skinny. I can move that across actually. If I move that across to actually where the dress is, just pop that. It's isolating the dress. So you see we're going, it's fairly subtle, but we're going from that washed out blue to a more saturated blue. Likewise, these fall colors, we can pop these fall colors. They're clearly around here somewhere. I can use the mouse wheel to make this thing that impacts bigger and smaller, and I can move these dividers at the bottom. So I'm going to go around there, and you'll see those colors just richening up really nicely. Possibly not something we would do in this photo because this is our hero, and we're making this the hero, but again, unlike last time, we have the tone curve. So there's our skin tone right in the middle. So if we drag that up, we in a single swoop are really fixing that exposure. I'm going to use the blacks to close up this gap. It's just the way I do it. Now this model is actually pretty pale, so this is not a white balance problem. It's her skin tone, which we can fix. But let's focus on playing around here. Lightness too. So we know that the trees are in this color area, so we can pull this down and lower the lightness of just the things that are that color. Another awesome trick is, let's see, let's take something like that. So those greens, we can pull those greens down. So look at that. Watch that as I move. Watch that tree as I move this. We're basically saying anything that is this green, change the color of it down into these oranges. So we're pulling things down. Now that is also getting pulled down. So we're pulling the oranges down into the reds, which made this look goofy. But over here, we've made that green into a nicer fall color. My goal is not to create it. My goal is not to create a perfect finished image here. My goal is to show some principles. So the fact that this is all going crazy orange in the background, I'm not going to care about right now. But this is the start. This is the very least you can do with this module. There's a whole lot more you can do with this module. Like you can take everything of a certain brightness and pull down the lightness, or pull down the saturation, or change the color. I mean, so there are some pretty advanced things you can do by changing this, but by default it is by hue or color, and it's just really good. Like let's see, do we have anything that could be usefully actually done with this here? Where I'll sometimes do it is, say I have somebody with a shirt on in a portrait and the shirt is just too loud. I'll say it's a loud blue shirt. I can just pull the lightness of the shirt down and the saturation of the shirt down and turn it into a navy, or kind of a navy shirt or a black shirt. But even in a photo like this, let's use tone curve to do it super quick. Come on, give me the so this is underexposed, or at least without a base curve it appears to be underexposed. But check out what the power of the tone curve, like holy crap. That already is super badass. And in fact, at the end of the last part 2, what was really missing from this image was the pop of a little bit of an S curve in every single image. It's definitely my style, and it's very common to have a little pop. And this is actually a little pop, even though that went up quite a ways. It's because I had to use it to push this all the way over here. But let's do a cool split tone on this. In fact, let's just use the shadows to go for a bluer background, and notice that is not affecting her skin tone at all. And then let's use this to make the coat into something a little bit more funky. So we're turning the coat really into the reds and oversaturating, and it's kind of hitting the face there a little bit, which is not what we want, but that is something we can fix with masks, which is something else that we're going to talk about. Let's use something else for mask. So what else do I want to introduce in terms of modules? Tone curves, super important. These two to me are the most they're the basic colorizers, color correction and color zones. Between these two, you can do so much in a super visual way, in a way that some of these other color things feel much harder work, harder to understand. So those are really awesome. The only other thing I'm going to introduce is, and I hope I remember, I'm going to list off another few that I use frequently but I don't have in my favorites. Let's talk about this equalizer. This is stupidly powerful. This I'm just going to deal with, well, let's look at some presets. Bloom just kind of did that kind of cloud around, basically took the brights and created a little bit of a haze fuzz around the brights. Clarity, I mean, that's bad, but you see what it's doing. And looking at what it actually did is it took this line and shifted everything up. Course, it is pushing the things on this end of the spectrum up. You know what? Let me rewind. Let me explain what this actually does. Look at this image and think of fine versus coarse granularity. So if you're looking at hair, like this hair, this is fine detail. If you are looking at like the change of color and contrast and the transition between this area and this area, this is very coarse detail. So this end deals with the fine. So if I go in these super fine hairs and I move this up, we will see it's enhancing the sharpness of those super fines, or removing that, or the opposite. We've softened and smoothed the fine. But when you soften and smooth fine, you get a definite perception of loss of detail. If we pull this whole thing down, we're basically making everything go to mush. It's like doing a blur. So, and I'm gonna do, you know what? I'm gonna just deal with this Luma tab and not this Chroma tab, because I know there's a couple of really good YouTube videos out there that spend 15-20 minutes just on this module. So I just want to plant the seed for you in some things that this can do. So in a picture like this, skin is typically around here. So if you boost here, you're making skin look worse. If you drop it a little bit, you're making it look better. So you're smoothing skin there. But you're also smoothing details in the eyes. And if you watch my videos, you'll see doing that is very, very common for me. A double reset. Let's say local contrast, I would probably drop on an image like this, and then I'll exaggerate it a little bit so it's clear. But look at the difference between that and that. So messing with the coarse end of this is giving kind of a fashion highlight, dodge burnish kind of thing. But let's take down the detail of the skin and boost the detail of the hair. Then let's zoom in on this and note that we've kind of lost some of the sharpness of the eye by doing that. So let's look at masks. We're going to do a few examples of masks. I am going to use a drawn mask, and just to keep it simple, I'm going to do an ellipse. I'm going to do that ellipse over the eye. Shift or Control. I never do it this way. And then the zoom, the control. I never do it this way. There it is. Shift and mouse key is changing. So this is the harsh edge of the mask, and this is where it feathers out to. So if I do that, actually all of this setting is only applying to the eye, which is the opposite of what we want. So if I invert that mask, the filter is being applied to everywhere except that mask. So we've effectively cut a hole out. Let's do it a different way. I can just draw one. We've effectively cut a hole in what this module is doing on the screen. We'll do it like that too. And you saw that sharpened up. So that's one way to use a mask, is to remove an effect from a specific place in an image, which is a good idea if you do something on an image and you lower the sharpness of the eyes or the mouth. Let's do another mask like this. I'm going to press Control. I'll show you. If I do this without pressing control, the mask kind of adds some rounded edges. Right click to remove it, right click to remove it. Oh, how do I remove this whole thing? Because I never use these. I'm going to hold control. Actually, let's do the... No, I don't want to do that. How do I remove this whole thing in one go? I don't know. I'm going to remove each point. Okay, so select. I'm holding down the control key and I'm going to click all the way around the lips. And then right click to say it's the last one, and you can see that that just sharpened up too. So now when we add that image, when we add that module in and out, we are creating an effect, but we have masked out certain areas. So going on to masks more, where you're more likely to use a mask to include something. So let's go back to this image, which we had to play around with quite a lot to get the face exposed correctly. Let's do that slightly differently this time. Let's get it. Let's play with the exposure like that. Let's say that's what we want to do with the exposure. And just to recap on the colors, let's take these green leaves and change the hue of them down to more fall colored. Boom. So it's another, using that again and making it more saturated. Just for fun. And then let's do this. So you can actually have multiple instances of the same module. So this is my exposure module. I can have a new instance of the exposure module, and now I have effectively a whole new exposure module. Now you're probably not going to do that unless you're doing some kind of mask. So let's do another drawn mask, and keeping this simple again, I'm just going to draw one with this. And I'm going to just kind of use this to lighten up that face. Now you can see that this instance of the exposure module only impacts what is masked there. Now you can see that is that filter, that feathering is really bad that I've done. Like it's too much, but I hope you get the idea there that you can either use a module or take a module and only apply what's going on by drawing a mask, and only the mask is affected by what you do with that module. The other kind of mask, let's see if we can use this. The other kind of mask that I use, oof, is that how we left that? No. The other mask that some people use a lot, I use a little. I tend to, I think more than other people, I tend to, if an image really needs to be fixed, there are very few times I will work my ass off to fix an image. If the lighting is, if the highlights are way blown out, or if it needs a whole lot of fixing, I'm going to say that's wasn't a well taken image. So my edits are fairly fast. If you watch my other videos, it's not so much about fixing stuff, it's about what we've done in these images. It's taking something and just massaging the subtleties to get to an end result. Parametric masks. So parametric masks, I don't use all that much. But here's an example of when you might use a parametric mask. So there, this image now clearly, because I've bumped this contrast up like that, is clearly, it's got hotspots that are totally overexposed. In this image, that's just dumb. I've created that falsely. If this, say I lit this really badly and there was a hot spot, things were exposed really well, but there was a hot spot on the top of the forehead because the light, just because of the way the light was facing or the way I'd set things up, then I'd be more likely to use this trick. So this is really for demonstration purposes. I'm going to use a parametric mask, and I'm going to click this button, which now shows that everything is currently impacted by this parametric mask. Now, by using these sliders, we are changing what is impacted by the parametric mask. And my goal here is to slide this up until it's including that stuff that I know to be hot, and then to back this off a little. I'm basically trying to isolate the things that are between this brightness and this brightness that are the hot spots I know to be there. Let's go with that. Then I'm going to blur the edges of that mask so that the impact isn't so vicious. If I turn that off, we haven't actually done anything with this module yet, but now moving the slider is only affecting the parts that are covered by the mask. Now if I go to the extreme, it looks like a burn, but in a situation where you have something slightly, like a slight hot spot, what I just did, exactly what I just did, is a really good trick to isolate that hot spot and bring it down a little bit. Now, I do not use parametric masks very often, so after playing around with some real basics with these modules and the stuff that I'm talking about here, I highly recommend that you put on your to-do list to go and find a video that's just about parametric masks, because there are people out there can explain this and use this better than I do, so go find those. The last thing I'm going to talk about briefly, and I think this is a good photo to use as an example, is noise. Let's take the last week's version of this image and see if that's, yeah, perfect. So look how much noise there is here. There are a bunch of noise-related modules in Darktable. A bunch. I have a full video on Denoise, and to be honest, it's one of the first videos I did, and it wasn't. I don't actually recommend it. I'll probably do another one. It lacks information about some really important ones, which are raw denoise and profile denoise, which I'll go into briefly now. But denoise to a certain extent is just kind of suck it and see. It's playing around and seeing what works for the image. But to go into some of the really briefly, raw denoise is pretty brutal in its default setting. It's happening really early. Remember we talked about this pixel pipe? It's happening really early in the steps of processing of the image. So this is the unmodified image, and then Darktable is putting it through things in this order. So raw denoise is really, really early in that order, like right up front, even before exposure check. But if you take raw denoise and you start at 0, and you just click it up, Around the 2 or 3 level, you can find that it really really does a good job. You're definitely going to lose sharpness. If I was working on a one-off image for a campaign or something and I was denoising in any way, I would mask out the eyes and the mouth and possibly other details from the denoise, because denoising does blur. But there's the raw denoise as a cheap and cheerful easy step like that at 2 is actually a vast improvement. And that was super close, but you can tell even at a distance, hopefully you can on YouTube video, I can tell at a distance that is just bringing a kind of an edge to the image that's just better. Another one worth noting is if you go into, so this is taken with, this shot is Nikon D800 with the Nikkor 85mm f1.8G. Very common lenses, a very common kit, and because of that, Darktable has a profile for this camera at this ISO. So this is a whole nother step. This is somebody has calibrated this module to do the best job it can with this camera and this lens. Is it this camera and this lens, or is it just this camera and this ISO? Yeah, it's just this camera and this ISO. So at this camera at ISO, it's suggesting that denoise, which can also often be pretty decent. So taking that strength down again to a point where it's just making that difference, that's doing a better job for me than the raw denoise did. That's pretty damn good. Other things worth mentioning, denoise bilateral is pretty powerful, but it's really, really, really putting in a lot of hard work. Like, look at how long this is working just to do that. So, I mean, it did a really good job, but like I zoom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I don't even know if it did as well as the profile denoise. But if you play around and find that bilateral denoise is the one that is best for the image you're using, then keep that in mind, turn it off, then turn it on right at the end, because it's going to drive you nuts. Because if I leave that on and I go to crop, or if I go to sharpen, or if I go to do anything, it is going to take for damn ever. It's just to turn off. To mention the equalizer again that we've already looked at, we were playing with this curve. This curve in both luma and chroma can impact noise, and in fact there's a denoise algorithm that can sometimes work really well, and if it does, it's great because it's not CPU intensive at all. So that's that. I'm going to stop there. That's as far as I'm going to go with denoise. Suffice it to say, if there's noise in your photos, there is a whole lot you can do. There's even let's just do that. Just for fun, there's a guy. Sorry, man, I don't remember your name, but somebody posted the denoise triple on the Facebook Darktable unofficial the other day, and what he's doing is he suggested taking 3 completely different 3 different using 3 different instances of the profile denoise with different settings in terms of the blend mode, which is like another whole insane amount of detail that can be done with Darktable. But 1, 2, 3 to create a pretty damn decent denoise that does not blur. Let's look at the difference between that. So look at that. Look at the noise disappearing, but the sharpness in the eye staying. That's pretty good. So lots of denoise. Let's recap. We have played around in this part 3 with some new modules. We have brought in the tone curve, which is really cool, very, very powerful. Even on this image, it's kind of what I think at the end of the last, I think I kind of cheated with part 2 and brought in the tone curve because it was bugging me that I couldn't do that. So tone curve, super powerful. Play around with that for 30 minutes with a whole bunch of images and it'll blow your mind. Play around in here too, just for fun. Then say take an image like this, take any outdoor image and give yourself the challenge of turning it into a fall pick. And I have a video specifically on when I exactly did that. Or take an image where you want to pop the contrast in, or pop the saturation of a particular piece of clothing, or where you want to make somebody's skin stand out. Like check this out. You can, if you pop the lightness of down here in the reds, you can actually do, it actually improves skin, which is also cool. So play around with this for 30 minutes, then take some images that you're really happy with and are finished to you, and use this to add a split toning effect. Get some looks that you think are cool, or just play around with these filters. For example, darktable suggests to warm an image up, you just move this up a little bit. So play around in here for sure. Play around in the equalizer. Take an image that has lots of different stuff in it. Like that, say. Is that going to sharpen? Where are we? So look at this fur. Look at that fur when I drag that up. Oh, it's going very slowly now because of the screen recording. But when I drag things up here, the detail coming in here is just really making it pop. But she's got amazing skin and I've made her look bad. So if you create some situations like this and then use parametric masks, or just drawn masks, actually use a drawn mask just to say, you know what, I only want that effect to happen around the fur, and play around with parametric mask for a while, get comfortable with that. Find a photo where maybe there's two people and one of the people's face is looking underexposed, and use a parametric mask just to this is weird the way this is jumping in. What's going on? It's just the screen recorder. It's using up 154% CPU, which is making everything kind of go borked here. But say you have a photo where you've got a face underexposed. Clone a new instance of exposure, pump it up to where you think that face should be, and then do the simplest of drawn parametric masks. To impact just the face. So play around with some of this stuff. 2 hours. 2 hours. If you play for 2 hours with all of this stuff, you're not a noob anymore. And then in terms of other modules you might want to play around with, low pass, which is a blur. It is a blur. High pass, which is very powerful. Probably want to find a tutorial on high pass, because clearly that's not what you're going for, but you can do some really powerful stuff with high pass. What do I use often? I use bloom once in a while. You know what? After you've worked with those modules a few times, start looking at my other videos, my darktable edit series. That's a good idea. If you look at my quick edits that I do once in a while, and more recently weekly, you'll start to see me use the same tools you've already learned here, and introducing some new ones, and everything should make total sense for you, and you're not a noob anymore. So I guess this is the very last video in the NEWB series. I hope it's been useful. Please like and subscribe. And even, it seems now at YouTube, you've got to request notifications from a channel. There should be a little bell down where the like and subscribe is. Click that if you want notifications of new videos of mine. It has been fun. Thank you so much for the feedback that I've been getting on these. It's very encouraging. And that's it. Have a good one. Bye.